Welcome to another program on the Together We Can project here at Fever 107.3 FM. My name is Lokesh Soni, and I'm joined by Jennifer Bute, GP, and lady who's traveled and worked in Africa, has been a medical educator most of her life, and was in 2009 diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Since then, she's been on a bit of a mission to help to inform the public about dementia and perhaps give a little bit of a re-education about what it means and how best it might be tackled. So I'm very glad and happy and welcome Jennifer Bute to Fever FM today. Thank you for joining me, Jennifer.
Pleased to do so.
Thank you. So firstly, could I start by just asking you, what is dementia?
Oh, help. Dementia means different things to different people. It means that their brain isn't working properly and able to function. There are so many different kinds of dementia. There are 5 main kinds, but there are many more than that. But, well, for me, it involves things like getting lost and difficulty with figures and thinking and performing familiar tasks, communication, not recognizing people. And that applies to almost everyone with dementia, and it can progress in different ways. They can also get hallucinations, get very confused, and their memory is almost always affected in some way.
Okay. And do we know what the cause is of dementia today?
There are many different causes depending on the cause.
Right.
For example, if we talk about cancer, what's the cause of cancer? Well, it depends what kind of cancer. So there are many different kinds of dementia. For example, vascular dementia is because of the blood supply to the brain. People who've had strokes, who have high cholesterol, which is like me, or who had people with diabetes, because the blood vessels with the sugar in it get so big and fat, they don't go through the blood vessels very easily, so they get blocked. So it depends on the cause. There are many different causes. Some is genetical, is hereditary, but very few of them are. A lot of people get very worried about that, but very few dementia is actually hereditary. Too much alcohol can cause it. You're more likely to get it if you smoke. There are so many different causes, and your diet and your exercise and all that kind of thing can affect it. But once you've got it, it's almost academic what the cause was. You just have to get on and do something about it.
Right. And so what you're saying, the cause is not necessarily genetic. You're saying in most cases then it's a lifestyle thing.
It can be, yes. The genetical ones tend to be the younger people. A lot of people say, well, my father had it. Well, my father had it. But that doesn't mean to say you're going to get it. It is a fact, I think, that one person over the 65, 1 in 5 will eventually get it. And as everyone lives longer than they used to in the past, more people appear to have it. But in fact, the number of people who are actually getting it proportionally is going down because of lifestyle changes. I was an evidence-based doctor, and there was a very important finger study, which I won't bore you with, but it was set up and proved that changes in lifestyle improved the rate of heart attacks and that kind of thing, and also improved dementia. So yes, some of it is lifestyle.
Yeah, it's interesting. We interviewed a doctor who specialized in cardiology, and he mentioned that during the war periods, during World War I, World War II, when rationing was brought in, that actually the rate of stroke and heart disease dropped quite dramatically during that period. So although the war was a very difficult and horrible time for people, and many people died being involved in the war, it seemed that there were a lot of lives saved because of what would have been regarded as a poorer diet at the time, which is kind of ironic, really. Is there something similar with what you've seen with dementia or Alzheimer's?
It's difficult because Alzheimer's is slightly different. I mean, well, they're all so different. I mean, Lewy body is completely different, but that's very difficult to diagnose until after you've actually died because it doesn't show up on an ordinary scan. And Alzheimer's has had such a lot of bad press about it because of the amyloid hypothesis, which has been hopefully, disproved. Amyloid is a result. Yes, you certainly get a lot of amyloid in Alzheimer's, but that's a result of the condition.
These are amyloid plaques, are they, where there's kind of
Yes. But to
misfolded
me,
proteins in the brain?
yes, but to me, it's academic. I mean, as I was a doctor, if someone had an illness, they weren't particularly interested in the academic aspects of the illness. They wanted to know how they could live well with it, or how they could be helped, or how they could get better. So for me, dementia is less about the many different causes of it, because by the time you get it, it's too late almost to deal with that. And there is a lot more education going on in preventing it with lifestyle changes. But for me, once people have it, that's the time when you need to encourage them and show them there is something positive that can still be done, apart from a cure, which I don't think will ever happen as a cure, just as we never have a cure for cancer, because there are so many different kinds of cancer. They all have different cures, if you like, different treatments. And it's the same with dementia. Different types of dementia have different needs in the way they're treated.
Okay. And so, I mean, let's get to the kind of crux of the question then. How, it's been 2009 since you were first diagnosed. So that's what, some 13, nearly 14 years ago. How have things changed for you in that period? How is your approach to managing the Alzheimer's dementia? How has that changed or improved, or what have you learned along the way?
I've learned a tremendous amount, and I'm still learning. I have the privilege, because my father had it, I had patients with it, I have it, and I've lived in 2 different communities with over 100 different other people with dementia, living with them 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And I've learned so much, because everyone is different. And I learn from their stories, and I learn what helps them. And then I try and help others to understand how that can help them, someone different as well. And I also believe that we can improve things. And I think that all started from when I learnt from a Japanese professor. He was showing evidence at a conference that I was actually speaking at, and he was speaking, and I was so impressed. He showed video evidence of Japan, how they made old people do certain things in order to keep them well and alive and functioning. And I thought, this is fascinating. So analysing it, in fact, all they were doing were making, I mean, in England, we can't make people, but they were making the old people do things like reading, writing, and arithmetic, all in the same period of time. And for me, that was an eye-opener. When most of us were children, when we learnt preschool and early school, we did reading, writing, and arithmetic, the 3 R's. So our brains were wired up from the beginning to respond to that. In other words, we're learning now, forming new neuronal connections in the brain. So I thought, well, if this is true, if we do that, get people to do a little bit of reading, writing, and arithmetic in the same period of time on a regular basis, twice a week for half an hour, what difference will it make? And so that's what I started doing, running what I called my Japanese memory groups. Japanese in honor of the Japanese professor that I'd heard all this from. Not that he had said it was reading, writing, arithmetic, but that's where I got all the evidence and the information from, and the idea. And to my amazement, it made a difference, a tremendous difference. You see, we don't get better just sitting in front of a TV. If you have a stroke, you don't get better just by sitting in front of a TV. Nowadays, you have intervention, you have physiotherapy, speech therapy, and you're made to do things. You have to try and walk, and you have to use your muscles. Well, it's the same in dementia. We have to work at getting our brains to work. And if I have a disaster, which happens frequently, I have to sit down and think, now, what, Jennifer, can you do to try and prevent that happening next time? And it's jolly difficult sometimes. It's jolly hard work. It doesn't just happen. It means I have to make my brain keep going in order to form new connections, the bits that are all getting gummed up and aren't working properly. You see, I've had the privilege of having patients who've been involved in car accidents or disasters, and they've learnt. I still remember one man, he had had a stroke and had an operation that gone wrong, and he lost the ability to talk, to walk, to read, to write. And he relearnt. He completely relearnt, going through all the stages, that children go through, using a different part of his brain. He didn't read or write or walk as well, but from someone that was completely unable to do anything, I thought, well, this is amazing. We forget that our brains are so good. I can still talk. There are a lot of other things I can't do, though. I can appear to be better than I am. I don't recognize people. I don't know who people are. I don't know who my family are. I mean, it's a joke. I like it when people laugh at me. My sister comes to see me, and within 30 seconds of her having left my flat, I haven't a clue who she is. And she just thinks it's funny. Well, that's lovely. She knows I still care about her. I didn't know who my husband was, but one can cover up to some extent. But I have the privilege of still being able to talk.
Okay. And so, obviously you're saying that reading, writing, and arithmetic and done together as a kind of exercise to maintain your mental health is one strategy that people could use. What about food and diet? Does that have any role to play with Alzheimer's and dementia?
There is a lot of advertisements for diets and things, and that upsets me. I won't mention the main one, but I'm sure you know what I'm referring to, who says it's a cure for Alzheimer's. There's a lot of good in what is recommended, but it also incurs a lot of guilt, because you can't cure Alzheimer's. You can't. You can make the most of it and make the best of it, but there is no diet that can cure it. Diet can help it, but it is a complete fallacy to pretend that if you keep to a certain diet or a certain lifestyle, you can cure it. It just isn't true. And I've seen people whose lives have been destroyed almost by believing that this is the case and then feeling so guilty because it didn't work. So why not make the most of what we do have rather than get upset about things that are impossible? You see, I believe that everyone is different, but there are 3 principles that apply to everybody. And once we understand those principles, we can do a tremendous amount with dementia, with anyone with dementia, if we just understand the 3 simple principles. And the first is there's always a reason for everything that anyone with dementia does or says. It's a bit like a detective, exercise. If someone says something odd or behaves in a certain way, it's a matter of finding out, well, why did they do that? And if one can find out why and deal with that, it can quite often, not always, put it right or help. And the second principle is that there's always a reason. No, I've said that, sorry. The second principle, that feelings remain. And I think that's almost the most important principle. You see, if you can make someone feel that they're valued and cared for and loved, you can get away with an awful lot. If you get called to someone who's upset and distressed and confused, if you can enable them to feel they still have some worth and value and are cared for and are loved, it can cover a tremendous amount of other things. And I've seen it when I've been called to help with people with dementia who other people can't cope with. And I have never met them before, and I don't know anything about them. And I'm asked to go and help because things have got out of hand. What do you do? Well, I don't know the reason, and I haven't got time to find out. And I don't know. The third principle is that patterns continue, and I don't know their past. I don't know what is familiar to them. So all I'm left with is how to make them feel that they've got worth and value, and that's possible. You smile at them. A lot of people kind of glare at them and get cross with people that are behaving inappropriately. Well, that just makes things worse. But if you smile at them and don't threaten them in any way, I could tell you many stories, as to how that has worked, but it does, because feelings are so important.
Okay. And there was a third point as well. We've got reason, we've got feelings remain, and a third point.
Was patterns continue,
Patterns continue.
patterns from the past, the pattern of the reading, writing, and arithmetic, but also the routines, the familiarity of one's environment. For many people who have dementia, they get confused in environments that they've not been in before or aren't familiar to them. They get lost. I get lost, horribly lost, because I don't know where I'm going and I can't find my way. But if a place is familiar in some way with articles or colours, pictures, that kind of thing, and some relatives, with the best of intentions, don't understand that things can be so important. Something that appears quite unimportant to the relative might actually be very important to the person with dementia because it's something familiar. Routines are familiar, having possibly the same thing for breakfast or getting up at the same time or going out for a walk or things like that. Watching certain television programs again and again, doesn't matter. It's the pattern, the familiarity of the pattern that continues. And that's important too.
Okay. And so just coming back to the diet side of things, is there any kind of recommendations around diet, or do you feel that that's one of the aspects of lifestyle that needs less attention?
Diet. Well, you want a diet that is not going to encourage, the vascular problems or diabetes. So you need to eat the kind of diet that kind of person would eat. In other words, low fat, low cholesterol, healthy Mediterranean type diet, lots of fruit and vegetables and that kind of thing. But, we don't need to get hung up on it. Some people, when they get more advanced dementia, they get a sweet tooth and they want to eat lots of sweet things. Well, why not? There's no point making life miserable. And, if someone's got advanced dementia, trying to say, no, you can't have any of that because it's bad for you, isn't a bit unkind, isn't it? The diet and that kind of thing is really what happened before and in the earlier stages. I mean, I still try and keep a good diet and I exercise because that's very important. See, people don't realize that just simple exercise can make a difference. I think some people remember their teachers used to walk up and down in the classroom, or when they were studying, their lecturers would walk up and down because there is scientific evidence that it helps your brain to work better. That if you're walking, your brain works better, which is why quite often if someone is able to go for a walk with someone else, if they have dementia, you have conversations on that walk, which you might not have if they were sitting down. But if someone is much more advanced or too old and they find it difficult to walk, then there are other forms of exercise, even moving your arms around can work, sitting down exercises. So it doesn't have to be just walking. There are other kinds of exercising one's muscles and moving things around.
Okay. So exercise
also help, and it's worth doing every day.
Okay, great. So exercise of importance. Enjoy your food is the message I'm taking away from the diet side of things. Although reducing foods that might impact the vascular side of things, which is kind of fat and cholesterol found in mostly animal foods, isn't it? But the real thrust of what you're saying is for people suffering with Alzheimer's, dementia, is the reason the feelings remain and that patterns continue. And those three principles are kind of the key things that you'd like to emphasize. I'm getting.
Yes, that's right. And one can get almost swamped with information and things you should do and things you can't do and how you cope with things. So I like to make things as simple as possible. People say, well, they hear, oh, you mustn't say this to them, or you shouldn't say it like that. So, well, what on earth do I say? So it's quite easy. You don't have to remember all those instructions. Just remember the words. For example, I talk about dementia as rementia. So all the words to do with like reassurance is so important all the time. People with dementia need to be reassured. And you don't tell them what to do. You request and you respect them. And if things are going well, you reinforce it. And if they don't understand what you're saying, you rephrase it. I know some people say you shouldn't. You should say the same thing over and over again. Repeat it, repeat it. Well, if they don't understand it the first time, then well, why say the same thing again? Rephrase it and reconsider if things don't go well. And remember together, that's another one. There's nothing worse than someone saying to you, oh, do you remember when? Well, the answer is no, or we freeze inside if someone asks us a question that involves memory, because our memories have got holes in them. So the better thing is to say, oh, I remember when we did this. And that enables the person to join in. Oh, yes, I remember too. And the person hasn't frozen by the person saying, and do you remember? And I love getting people with dementia to talk. I had the privilege of living amongst all these people for so many years. And most people thought they were mute and unable to talk. Well, that is not true. I believe it's possible to get anyone to talk until the end, because the real person remains trapped inside the condition and they need to be found. And you have to find all these little tricks of getting them to talk. And that, I think, is almost great fun, really, in getting them to talk. And people would say to me, oh, come and help. You know, my wife's not talking to me anymore. Can you come and help? So the best thing is to listen to music first, or, you know, they've been singing and listening to music, because that helps to kind of join up the loose ends. So that's a good way to start. And after they've been listening to their favorite music, you know, that's a good way to then get them talking. But the worst thing you can do with them is to say, you know, they'll say, I can remember people saying to me, well, I'll prove that my mother doesn't talk. And they'll say to the mother, so what did you have for lunch? Well, that's asking a factual question of someone who's distressed, and that will freeze them inside and they will say nothing. So I'd sit down next to them and I'd say, oh, it's a lovely day today. The sky's blue. And oh, look, there's some flowers out there and there's some birds singing. It's so lovely. And it's so nice to see you. And then they would, after a while, start joining in, because they felt relaxed. They felt that someone was bothering with them. And they weren't being kind of attacked by being asked questions that they couldn't give the answer to. You know, people can ask me questions. I haven't a clue what the answer is, but now I just say I have no idea. It doesn't worry me. And then if something gets out of hand, people say, well, what on earth do we do? Well, it's very easy. You see, you just think of one of the senses. We have 5 senses, don't we? I can never remember what they all are, but there's kind of sight, hearing, touch,
smell, taste,
and smell. That's right. So you use one of those senses. For example, taste. Well, sometimes giving someone something to eat. If they're distressed, give them a cup of tea or a biscuit or something. That will help. Or if sight, everything's being, you know, too bright or too shiny, well, turn off some of the lights or give them something familiar to look at. Or, you know, hearing, we'll give them some nice music that will calm them down. And touch, you know, touch them, calm them down. Does that make sense? Use one of the senses. You think, well, what do I do? Let me just think, you know, what can I use one of these senses that might actually help in this situation? And that quite often helps as well. And with me, if I get dreadful hallucinations, they're usually smells, bad smells. And the best thing is a nice smell to kind of replace the bad thing. And I think if people can understand, if one can replace the bad, overwrite it with something good, you know, if there's distress, overwrite it with some good feelings, some happiness, some smiles, rather than to get cross or upset, because we mirror other people's emotions. So if someone is with us and they get agitated and upset, we're certainly going to get agitated and upset as well. So sometimes the person with trying to help the person with dementia has almost to pretend at times, perhaps, you know, if they are upset, they mustn't show it, because if they show it, the person with dementia will definitely get more upset.
Jennifer, it's been super interesting listening to you. We have reached the end of the time that we've got for the interview. But before we go, I guess just very quickly, do you have any final words for anybody who's a carer or suffering with dementia, Alzheimer's?
Well, they're two completely different things. The carers need to have time for themselves. People forget that they also need to be looked after, as well as the person with dementia. So carers often get a bad deal. But if you ask people with carers and people with dementia what they feel bad about, you'll find they're the same thing. So we're not so different. So anyone with dementia, their value does not change, however much they feel that they are going downhill. They still have worth and value in every way, just as the carers do as well.
Great. Thank you very much for joining us today here at Fever 107.3 FM. It's been a real pleasure. Jennifer Bute, former GP, medical educator, and now evangelizer for people with dementia and Alzheimer's. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.